Hello, my name is Pappy Bedard, and this tutorial was actually prompted by request. I had posted a short animation at New Year's Eve to New Year's Day showing a transition between 2019 and 2020 text, and I got so much attention for it on Facebook uh, that I decided to put together this tutorial. It really involves how to use fields with Volume Builder. So I hope you enjoy. First, let's take a look at the animation I did. So there were two parts to this project. One was eroding the 2019 and replacing it with the 2020. And the other was the two cloners for the ants, one on the 2019 and one on the surface. To morph the old date to the new date, I used volumes and fields. And I want to show you a little bit of information about how you use volumes with fields. So I'm using R21. In R20, you would choose create field and then choose a field. In R21, there's a handy button up here where you can choose a field. So let me start by selecting a spherical field. Now, you really can't see what that is, but basically what a field is a 3D pattern of varying density. Fields can be used as fall-offs or as forces or as actual 3D objects, which I'm going to do by putting it into a volume builder. So I'm going to create a volume builder and put that spherical field into it. Now right away what it does, if you're not familiar with Volume Builder, is it creates these 3D pixels called voxels. And as I mentioned earlier, a field is a 3D pattern of varying density. Well, what does that mean in this case? Let me show you another way of looking at that spherical field. By default, a volume builder uses a sign distance field, but if I change that to fog, you can see all the points within that sphere. Let me change the voxel size down quite a bit to 2, and you can kind of see that here's the varying density. On the outside of the sphere, all the points are black, and at the center of the sphere they're white. So they range in value from 0 or black on the outside to white or 1 on the inside. Now I'm going to switch back to sign distance field, click on that spherical field, and explain why this diameter doesn't seem to match the diameter of the field. Well, the reason is that there's this surface threshold. Any one of those values that exceeds this threshold will turn into a voxel. But if it's smaller than this threshold, like black to half black or half white, gray, then it won't create a voxel. So that's why you see this. So let's look at a couple other types of fields. I'm just going to delete this spherical field, and I'm going to add a linear field. And we're going to put that in the volume builder. And we see this weird little half of a cube in here. What's up with that? Well, if I go into Volume Builder and click on the linear field and expand the coordinates, you can see it defaulted to a 40 centimeter cube for that field. I'm going to make that 200. Here's a little tip. If I click on any of these S's for scale and then select the first item, type in a new value, 200, and then hold down the Control key and hit Enter, it changes all three values. So now let me back up here and look. So there's our linear field. Now why is it only showing half of a box? Well, again, that has to do with, go back to Volume Builder, it has to do with this surface threshold. If I change this to fog, you'll see the values of the points. They're 0 or black on the left and white or 1 on the right. So anything greater than a half is going to turn into a voxel, and less than a half will be blank. So let me go back to sign distance field, and that's why we only see half that box. So the most important thing to know here is that you can build a volume from a field, and that for every 3D point in the field, if the 3D density value 0 to 1 or black to white is greater than the volume builder surface threshold, then the voxel will exist, otherwise it will not. Let's look at a few other fields. I'm going to delete the linear field, and this time I'm going to create a random field. And we're going to put the random field in the volume builder. And again, it looks like it's a tiny little box, so we've got to go to the random field here and change this to 200 or something. And now that took a little bit longer to calculate. Now, this is what a random field looks like. And by default, it uses, let me just go into the random field here, and you could see it uses the type noise. And by default, it uses Perlin, which is the standard noise in Cinema4D. Now let me just change the scale of this to 300%. So just like I was explaining before, this field is a range in values of noise in 3D that ranges from 0 to 1, and any place it's less than that threshold of 0.5, there's no voxel, and any place it's greater than, then there is a voxel. So let me, so by the way, I've been deleting a field and adding a new one. I could just as easily just come here and change the field type to another field. So random field, it does allow you to use noise types. And what's similar to that is the shader field, but it gives you a little bit more control. So I'm going to pick the shader type. Of noise, which is going to duplicate it. Now you have this ability to go in and do all kinds of other options with this noise. I'll change this back to 300. You can do all kinds of things. Think about what the low clip does. Is it makes, by default, black values are black. Slightly lighter than black, you can turn those black if you raise the low clip. So now there's more black in here. Do you notice what happened here? Watch the screen as I change it to a higher percentage. So I'm creating more and more black pixels, so it's erasing what's in between the noise. And you can see a 2D representation of it here. I'm creating these islands of white, which wind up being like little blobs of voxels. I'll set that back. Now, and conversely, if I reduce the high clip, I'm making more and more items white. So it's closing those holes, making more voxels apparent. I'll reset that. By the way, I'm resetting to default by right-clicking on these two little arrows. Let me show you. So if I change the low clip to somewhere up in here, now it's 31. If I right-click right where those two arrows are, it sets it back to the default. So there are lots of other types of fields, as you see here, like formula fields in Python and sound, radial, and other geometric shapes. But I won't get into those for the purpose of this tutorial. But one last field that's important to talk about is the group field. So I'm going to add a group field. And what that allows you to do is combine any number of fields together using blending modes. And I'm going to need to do that in this tutorial. So if I click on group field, you can see that I can create a new field. I can add fields under that thing. So let's add a linear field, and let's add a random field, and let's delete this shader field from here under the volume builder, and instead add this group field and see what that looks like. Oh, here it is again, a little box. We know how to fix that. You click on group field and then change. I can see these are still selected, so I could type 200, Control Enter. So right now, that's how our two fields are blended. I can go into the random field and up that a little bit to 300. So I think you can tell what's going on here. Our linear field is added, which we've seen before gives us only a half of a cube. And right now it's blending the random field with max. So what that's doing is it's taking the max value, the one closest to 1, or white, anywhere these two fields overlap, and then using that value. Well, that's not what we want. I want to try something else here. Let me explain what some of these other things do. What normal does, if I choose that, is it literally overwrites every value from the field below it. These are kind of like layers in Photoshop. The one at the bottom is the base, and each one above that either blends with it or does something else. So if you choose normal for this one, it basically ignores the one under it. This is pure random field. Minimum will take the minimum value at any point where they overlap. And in that case, the minimum is, well, the minimum is always 0 on this side because we know that the linear field is always less than 0.5 on that side. So since that's the minimum, we don't get anything there. That's not what I want to do. If we use subtract, then what that does is it subtracts from the linear field all of the values in the random field. And that's not what I want either. Multiply. It multiplies the values together. So anything on the left side is 0. 0 times anything is still 0, so we don't get anything on the left side. On the right side, it's going to multiply values that are both less than 1. And you know what happens then? Let's say you had a value of 0.6. Well, 0.6 times 0.6 is 0.36, and that's less than 0.5. So then that spot would disappear. So you have a lot less geometry in that way. So that's not what I want. Now how about overlay? Ooh, that looks just like what I want. Now how does overlay work? Basically, anywhere the two items overlap, the whites and the blacks of the linear field stay the same, but the middle darks get lighter and the middle lights get darker. So see if I can explain this. So here in this random field where the values are not 0, it made this black of the linear field lighter. So some of these values became above a half, and now we could see geometry there. And then on this side, some of these light values got darker, so it opened up more pockets. But what's nice is this good transition between a good solid base here and an empty base here with this crazy noise in between. Now, one of the things we could do is go to the linear field and shrink it a little bit. And you'll see what happens is it's crushing the amount of noise we have in between, which I like. So we're going to leave it at that. And then let's change the linear field so that instead of plus x, it's plus y. Now we have this. That's interesting. What if we took that and we subtracted it from some other geometry? That's what I'm going to do next. So I'm just going to add some, well, I'll add a motext. And I'll change this, I don't know, just to the letter O. Let's pick some nice big fat font. Oh, I don't know. How about this crazy one? And we'll make it nice and thick. And let's see, I'll move that kind of into the middle here and down to the bottom. Go back here. Now, let's take inside our volume builder, which we only have a group field right now. Let's add the motext at the bottom. And then instead of union, let's subtract it. Interesting. What did I do here? Oh, I want to put the volume builder under there. Yeah, like that. I mean the motext under the volume builder. So now to make this look a little bit nicer, a volume builder actually isn't geometry. It's only voxels. That will not render. So what we need to do is add a volume mesher. I'll hold down Alt to put that as a parent. And now we can render this. Now what's cool about this, and this is the basis for my whole tutorial and how I made that transition from 2019 to 2020. So if I go to this linear field and I animate its position, you can see that I can grow or shrink that. It looks like it. I had posted an apple one time and it showed the apple being eaten by ants. So that is the basis for part 1 of this tutorial. Oh, but I'll do one more thing before I open up that project. I'm going to select all these items, Alt-G to group them, change this to bottom, and then copy that, change this to top, and then inside of top, so I've got this duplicated. What I'm going to do is go into the remapping of the linear field and invert it. So anything you right now, the top part of this is the dark part of the linear field, and the bottom is the lighter part. When I invert it, it's going to go from light at the top to dark at the bottom. So I click this invert, and now I see the top part. But the random field also has to be inverted. So I'm going to go there and invert that. And now we have two perfectly interlocking pieces of this geometry. And if I select both of these linear fields and move them, that intersection point will move with it. So if I made the bottom part really grungy looking and the top nice shiny gold, and move those linear fields downwards, it would look like it's transitioning from grunge to shiny. Oh, and one other thing. Let's say we wanted a transition from an O to some other letter. So we just go to the top motext, and instead of an O, let's say I want it to turn into a K. So now if we grab these two linear fields and move it down, the O is turning into a K. It's morphing into a K. And that's how I did the 2020 from 2019. All right, so I'll go ahead and close this project. And open up the one with the year transition. Let's see. I used Redshift materials on this, so I'll go ahead and switch to my Redshift layout. I'll turn on the render view. So what I will do to begin with is to make this a little bit easier to explain, I'm going to turn off, well, first of all, you can see these 2019 and 2020 relate to that bottom and top that I just did in the example I was talking about. Basically a copy with those same kind of linear fields and random fields. And then the text is 2020 and 2019. And 2020 has a nice gold material, and the 2019 has a grungy, mossy, dirty material. But what I'm going to do is turn off the volume builders. It'll make it a little bit easier to navigate the scene. And just shrink these down. So my scene file is just some soft boxes and global lights and a camera and so on. I'm going to turn this camera off so I can show you what I did here. So let's shrink the scene. So if I go into ants, I have two cloners. One is a cloner for the floor, and that has an ant that has it's just a normal ant. And ant 2 and ant 3 are the same. Ant 1 has a platonic in it that has the same material as the same material as the 19. So here's an example. You could see it. So it looks like the ant is carrying off a piece of the 19. So every fourth ant on this spline looks like it's carrying an object. And the way I animated that is, let's see. So for this cloner, I believe, yeah, I just animated the start position. So let me go back to frames. All right, start is, let's see, how did I, no, I just have a rate. It's actually not animated. I have a 5% rate. Let's see if I can play this. Yeah, so that makes the ants move. There's no animation at all. It's just a rate in that cloner. Other things are, I do choose a line clone. I picked 42 as an amount. I believe right at the very end I animate that down because I wanted to end with fewer ants than I began. Yeah, so from frame 420, where the count is 42, to frame 450, where the count is 14. And the reason is I didn't want to have a whole bunch of ants at the very end. And then the spline, I just used this sketch mode, and I just drew lines back and forth, some in between the letters, so it looks like the ants are just going all over the place. Now, for the other cloner, that's the cloner that is only one single ant and in the cloner, and I don't believe there's any animation at all on this one. It's simply a multi-instance object. I did have to transform the ants so it looked like they were on the surface of the 19. Let me just, I'll zoom in here, and let's turn on 2019. Let's see, that'll be fully visible at the beginning. If I turn on this volume builder, you'll see all the ants appear. Takes a little while for the volume builder to generate all those voxels, and then for the cloner to find a position for all the ants. I think I got all that right. Let's see. Oh, here they go. So here's all the ants climbing all over the 2019. And what happens is the ants, so this cloner object uses the volume mesher for 2019. Now that mesh is constantly changing as we go across the timeline because the 2019 is shrinking because that linear field is slowly moving downwards. And each time that that volume mesher changes, it repositions the ants because there's always the same number of ants. Let's see. Yeah, there's 150 ants. I believe it stays at that rate all the time. So the smaller this goes, let me just forward ahead to say frame 260 and give it a few seconds. It's going to recalculate the volume builder for 2019, and you'll see because the field has moved down, it's going to look a little different. And then after it does that, then it has to generate all the ants on the new mesh. So you just see it just move down. So that's how that works. And like I said, it gives the impression that it's time lapse because those ants really jump around a lot each time the mesh changes. Anyways, and that's about it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Feel free to share it. And if you have ideas for other tutorials, please leave them in the comment. I'd like to do a lot more with volumes and possibly with blending modes for noise. I'd like to explain a lot more about how you blend different noises together and the different modes. Anyways, Happy New Year, everybody, and thank you for all your thumbs ups and requests on Facebook, and hope to do this again sometime. Bye-bye.